hockey player named Joe Murphy. And that story was about Joe's rise to fame and fortune as an NHL star, and then the turn in his life was becoming addicted to painkillers and winding up homeless. And I first told that story for TSN, flying to Winnipeg and then driving to Kenora, where I found him for the first time. And after that book, I kept having people ask me, when are you going to do something else on hockey? I kept putting it off until the spring of 2024. It had already been almost 2 years that the Canadian public had learned about this settlement in this case in London, Ontario, where a young woman referred to as EM in court documents had sued 8 players and Hockey Canada, alleging she'd been sexually assaulted in a hotel room in London following a golf and gala event in the summer of 2018. And I wasn't sure what the story was going to be until early 2024, when 5 players were charged criminally, and I knew there was going to be a trial. And I just thought, the trial, this case, that's the through line for a book, right? I can use this as a jumping off point to talk about all kinds of things that I've been hearing about, but that sort of became the bedrock for the book itself.
One of the book's central claims is that junior hockey culture encourages harmful views of women and masculinity. Can you elaborate on the specific mechanisms, the rules, expectations, or unwritten codes that perpetuate this environment?
Yeah, for sure. So I knew coming in that the hockey establishment would hate this book. And, you know, the work that we do as investigative journalism naturally means that leagues push back and, you know, we're not really welcome in the spaces that our hockey insiders are, you know, embraced in. But so I knew that the hockey world was going to say, listen, things like this happened back in the 90s when Sheldon Kennedy came out with his story about being abused by Graham James, but things are better now. It's better, it's much better. And so I made a point I used social media, I used Instagram to reach young men in their 20s who either played major junior hockey or tier 2 junior A hockey. I decided to leave junior B and junior C alone and just focus on the top levels of junior. And I sent out messages to several hundred men, and I wound up interviewing 58. And most of these 58 players agreed to let me use their names in my reporting. And I think you know how significant that is.
Massive.
Because when you have people sharing stories, one name that jumps out is Curtis Gabriel. And Curtis played in the National Hockey League and spoke very candidly about how he was a 16-year-old player in the Ontario Hockey League, and the pressure, the immense pressure that he faced to conform and to be one of the boys. And on his OHL team, what that meant was having sex with girls. And he told me he was close to being ready for that, but he just arranged something to get it over with. And he talked about how that shaped the way that he looked at sex and how it became transactional for him. And how, you know, many years later, he's now in his early 30s, he's struggled to have healthy relationships because of this, what happened to him when he was 16. And to me, you know, his story was so important because it laid out with his name next to his story, that these stories are not just boys being boys when they're 16, and that's the end of it. It showed that a man in his 30s is still haunted by the things that he was pressured to do half a life ago, right? And so, you know, every one of these players I spoke to, all of these 58 players, and I've actually interviewed more since the book came out, but the through line in their stories was all so eerily similar. First, they love hockey, right? I love hockey. I play it a couple times a week. My best friends in the world are through hockey. I have a son who fought cancer during the pandemic, and our hockey community rallied around us and, you know, made such a difference. It's a beautiful game. I think it's the best game. But the players that I talked to also identified that at the same time, there were all of these issues off the ice. You know, you're 14, 15, 16. Like kids, people might not realize this, but kids as young as 14 are moving away from their home to play junior A and living with a billet family. And Sheldon Kennedy would tell me, like, this is a real thing. You know, he moved away from home. He wasn't shaving yet. And all of a sudden, he's playing in a room. He's playing for a team, trying to be accepted in a locker room where there's men with full beards. And so what will a 14 or 15-year-old do in order to be accepted in those circumstances? And the answer I heard from these players is anything. If it means drinking to excess to the point of blacking out, they'll do it. If it means gambling, they'll do it. If it means starting Tinder accounts to meet girls so that you can introduce them to your older teammates, they'll do it. If it means bringing girls to rookie parties, they'll do it. And if it means being subjected to rites of passage, hazing, they'll absolutely do it. And these stories are happening even today.
It's amazing, as you mentioned, there's that peer pressure to get these things done. And that can be a lot to people. What often doesn't happen is sharing these stories. And you know, I'll reiterate what you said. It's incredibly difficult to get people to go on the record and share this, not just because of their own personal experiences and how traumatic they can be, also because you're looked at as, for lack of a better term, a rat. You know, even at 30 years old, you're friends with all your teammates. To even seem to put them in a negative light can be a challenging thing. But as I mentioned, it's very difficult to do that. So I'm wondering, in your experience, what are the power dynamics between players, coaches, team ownership, and the league structure that make it so difficult for players to be whistleblowers to come forward?
We're in a country where there's 3 seasons, right? There's hockey season, there's playoff hockey season, and there's getting ready for hockey season, right? And so if you are in this system, you will do anything it takes to stay in the system. If you think about it, who are you when you finish playing your last game of junior or as a professional? You're a hockey player. And talking about these things can mean that you can lose that part of your identity. And it's all you've ever been since the time you were 12 or 13 years old. If you've been one of these men, you've been told that you're different and you're special and you have a gift, and you're a AAA hockey player, and that means maybe you don't have to go to school like everybody else does. Maybe you can talk to girls whenever you want to. You can the rules of accountability that the rest of society lives by do not apply to these young men, and that's not my opinion. It's what they've told me, and these stories are in the book in their own words, right? So there is, because of that, because of the worry about being excluded, there is that concern, right? And two thoughts on this. One, that some of the things that these people go through, as particularly victims of sexual abuse, there's immense shame and self-blame in so many cases. And one of the statistics that it still shocks me is the average age that someone is when they first report childhood sexual abuse is 51. So on average, most people hold on to these stories for decades before they're prepared to share them. In hockey, it's no different, right? The men who are subjected to this often keep quiet about it for many, many years. One modest example, I did a feature for TSN a couple of years ago about painkillers in the NHL. And I interviewed players who had been given a drug called Toradol, which just helped them get through the playoffs every year. One of the players I interviewed is Ryan Kessler. And Ryan talked about how he was given this drug every day, and it did immense damage to his body, and now he's in his 30s and he has the body of an 80-year-old. The day after we showed that feature on TSN, he lived in California at the time. The Anaheim Ducks, his former NHL team, barred him from using their facilities to train and work out. So you speak out, you are kicked out of that club. Of course, the postscript on Ryan Kessler's story is he has since been charged with sexually assaulting a 16-year-old girl.
One of the things that I've encountered with hockey culture, and particularly around abuse, you mentioned, these players are willing to do anything, right? They're willing to do anything for their teammates, for veteran players, but they're also willing to do anything to make it to the NHL. And when you play junior hockey, you are literally one step away from playing in the NHL and making millions of dollars. So you write about the pipeline to the NHL and how that dream is used to keep players and parents compliant. How does this singular focus on advancement actively work against player well-being and accountability?
I don't know if I have a great answer for that. I mean, what do you think?
Personally, personally, I think that that is like when I did a 3-year investigation on Graham James. You know, one of the things I heard from a lot of the victims, a lot of people who were in and around those environments in Swift Current and you know, in WHL. And one thing that everyone said is he would always have these paychecks, the Montreal Canadiens, from, you know, just to remind people of what his influence, that he was able, you know, he could get you there. And when you combine that desire to play hockey and be on a team, even a WHL or OHL, a key team, with that then ultimate goal of making the NHL, we all grow up wanting to play in the NHL. We all grow up wanting to score that Game 7 goal. And so I find that when you look at other instances, when you look at hockey in particular, that carrot that carrot of making the NHL, I think, is one of the strongest pieces to conformity, to, you know, managing it extends, it all comes back to the dream. So you have that peer pressure of your teammates, and whether that's hazing rituals, whether that's acting, you know, wanting to be liked by the veterans, it's combined with that ultimate pressure of one day maybe making millions of dollars and not wanting to ruffle feathers, not wanting to tell on your teammates, right? Because you might witness, you know, when you write about it in your book, and I've seen it a lot, you know, these multiple gang rapes, assaults, right? Players who have not taken part in it, but witnessed it, they're not going to say anything, because if they say something, they're against the grain, right? They're against their team, and then ultimately the potential to lose that dream.
Yeah, the only illustration or photo that we actually used in the book is at the end of the first chapter, I think. And it's a picture of a sign that was hanging above the locker room of a junior A team in Ontario in 2023. And it said something like, "What happens in here stays in here." And, you know, the minute that that photo was sent to me and I called the team, the sign was taken down, of course, right? But I mean, I think that says it all. Also, to add on to that, the coaches and general managers throughout hockey, who are the ones that players would most naturally report these incidents to, they're former players themselves. And so it's all been so normalized, right? The whole, like this tradition of the hot box, where rookie players are told on a team bus to strip naked and jam themselves together back in the bathroom at the back of the bus. The coaches would have had to do that when they were 16, 17 as well. And so coaches I've talked to have said, like, what's the big deal about this? I had to do it and I turned out fine. So why are you making such a big deal about this now?
See, I feel like that cyclical cycle of abuse, right? And the fact that you have, you know, men who are in their 40s, 50s who've done it already don't view it as abuse, right? As we get more knowledgeable into what constitutes as abuse and the effects, and again, that culture of silence. You said the average person, you know, I know that's not related to strictly hockey, it's the sexual abuse victims in general, it's 51, right? They kind of come to grips later in life, because at one point in time, I think they actually thought they might have even normalized it. And then you get older, you get more mature, you kind of realize that, you know, what occurred to you and wasn't right. And I use that cyclical element of this is, you know, kind of what I would answer in this next question. But beyond the specific incidents we covered, what is the single most pervasive systemic failure you uncovered in the junior hockey system? Is it a failure of governance, education, or culture, or all three?
The stories that you do, you know, I feel like I could be interviewing Jeff here as well about your work, so I might turn the tables here in a couple of minutes. But to me, this all starts with a federal government and provincial governments that don't care about this. They have other priorities, whether it's a pipeline, whether it's, you know, trying to figure out trade relationships. Sport is an afterthought, and the people who are in charge of the sport portfolios typically are not somebody who has a lot of power within cabinets. So, you know, when the Canadian public was outraged in 2022 because we all learned that Hockey Canada was maintaining a secret slush fund that was being used with minor hockey registrations to pay off sexual assault allegations. that stirred some action, and it led to the Board of Hockey Canada being turned over. It led to the elimination of that slush fund, which I'm not sure is a good thing. I think that there should be a fund to compensate people who've been hurt. The problem that Hockey Canada had is that it kept that secret. And so, when I was asking questions, it occurred to me, well, why would they keep that secret? And the reason I think that it was kept secret is because if they made it a part of their annual report, and remember, Hockey Canada is an organization that reports everything down to how many kids under 9 in Newfoundland or Nunavut are playing hockey. They are meticulous at documenting. But if they'd been open and transparent with the public about that, then we would have known how pervasive this problem was and how many complaints were actually coming into the organization, right?
100%. Annual reports are the bane of my existence, and the elements and governments will go to hide information. I'm going to put this on us, and by us I mean me and the others in the crowd. What responsibility do we, and of course I think yourself as well, but since you're the author of this, what responsibility do we as fans and consumers of hockey bear for allowing this toxic culture to continue? And what is the most effective way for the audience to use the knowledge gained from the book?
We're going to come to that. I didn't answer your question before.
Okay.
So, what if there was one thing that I can have people actually that makes me angry as a citizen? There has been some progress, like I said. We've learned about this slush fund, and it's been dealt with. But in terms of where are we today, what does Hockey Canada do? This is still a secretive organization, even for all the changes and all the public scrutiny. If you have someone who is sanctioned today in Winnipeg by Hockey Canada, that's sanctioned for misconduct, and I'm talking about off-ice misconduct issues, and I'm talking about adults, not children. So coaches who are sending pictures of themselves to teenagers that they shouldn't be sending, saying things, doing things with children that they shouldn't be doing, those sanctions are a secret. So if this happens today in Winnipeg, no parent in this community has the right to know that information. And the reason is because Hockey Canada believes that the right to privacy of somebody who's been sanctioned is more important. They're worried about liability. They're worried about being sued. And so when I ask them about this, and I do this regularly, like every week for the last 2 years, I point out that other organizations, whether it's Gymnastics Canada, whether it's Athletics Canada, even provincial organizations like the Ontario Volleyball Association, you would know this from your reporting on teaching. Best practices is to inform the public. If someone has had due process and they have done things that they are sanctioned for, it is in the public interest to make that information public. And Hockey Canada still isn't there. It still believes that secrecy, when it comes to people who've done bad things, that's the way that they should be handling those cases because of potential. I guess the crudest way to put it is because of money, because they're worried about being sued by people.
Liability. A word that comes up quite often. So do I have to re-ask you the question of us now, or what we need to do, or what we should take from your book? I won't put too much in the front.
I think what I take from the book, and I've had so many people tell me that this is a heavy book, and it is, and I apologize for that. My TSN colleague James Duthie has a book out right now called Certified Beauties, and it's doing great. And it's, you know what? With respect to James, it's the same hockey book that comes out every year for the last 100 years. It's a book about how amazing the game is and about locker room hijinks and jokes and practical jokes. And it makes us all feel better about a sport that we all love, that makes us feel Canadian. And who doesn't love feeling like as a country we're really good at a sport? But that's not the book, in my opinion, that people need right now. What book we need is one that takes this on and gives people the information that they need to ask hard questions when it's somebody running for office, MPP, or a member of parliament, and they're canvassing and they're coming to your door and they're asking for your support. They're asking for my support. As a citizen, I'm asking questions like, why don't you care more about this? Why is this not a priority? We all want our kids in sports because we know all of the good that comes from sports. So why don't we want them safe? If I just took a show of hands, like who believes that Canadian children should be as safe as possible playing sports? Everybody here put their hand up. It's a no-brainer.
You'd be looking at the ones that did.
And I don't understand why our governments just won't take the win and do what they should be doing.
This transition. What do you say to people who go, Rick, he just hate hockey?
I mean, I've got smelly hockey gear in my house to prove I love hockey. You know, I play, like I said, I play 2-3 times a week. It's the best game. I've done a lot of stories that talk of, that celebrate resilience in players who've made the NHL and other leagues. So, the facts are what they are in terms of the stories that I've done. What do I say to people who say I just hate hockey? What is to say? I mean, how can you look at what is happening in Canada right now? The case in London, and it's important to say that that case ended in acquittal, and a judge in that case found that there was consent. But it was hardly the only case. There was a story in Quebec that I wrote about last year where 2 players pleaded guilty to sexual assault on the eve of their trial. There was a case of Noah Corson, whose dad, Shane Corson, was an NHL star, and he was convicted of sexual assault, and his 2 teammates pleaded guilty. There was the case last year of Gabriel Gagne, a former prospect of the Ottawa Senators, who was convicted of sexual assault, not for the first time. There's been cases all across Canada in minor hockey that local media and the CBC are reporting on, sexualized based hazing. To say, what are you doing, you hate hockey, to me is to just have your head in the sand and not be willing to accept the truth. And the other part is people who believe that don't have the courage to say that in a setting like this. It's always online. And it's always by somebody who doesn't have the courage to use their own names when they're posting from a social media account. And so who cares? You want to say that, say that. I believe in free speech. So, have your opinion, that's fine.
The thing I'm most interested about, whether it's an investigative story or a book, it's the stuff that doesn't get told in the book. And it's not the stuff that didn't make it content-wise. It's the journey. It's the process. And I think more people nowadays want to know how you got to what were the challenges with the book. So in that vein, given the sensitive nature of the allegations, what were the greatest professional and personal risks you felt you were taking when reporting this book?
The professional, I mean, the risk is again being an outsider in hockey, a game I love. Doesn't, I talked about this is the burden and this is the job that I've chosen, and so I accept this. This is the bargain I've struck. But that doesn't mean I love it. Who doesn't want to be liked when you're in a locker room or in a place with other hockey media, etc. So that's a modest cost. The bigger cost, I think, has been on my family. I've got 2 boys, and I would say a week hasn't gone by since October 2021, when I did an interview with Kyle Leach, a former NHL player, that my kids haven't been in the room when I'm talking about sexual assault with somebody on the phone. That's 4 years every week. That's heavy for them, right? I dropped my younger son off at university this September, and I remember saying to him, "Okay, we're gonna just talk about consent for a second." He's like, "What are you talking about? Like, we talk about consent every day for years." But so I felt like I'd done my job modestly, but I did say to him, and I think it's worth saying, like, I did say to him, my expectation of you as a young man being on your own now, away, and I hope other dads steal this and talk to their boys in the same way. I said, my expectation is that you'll be a protector of young women. And if you see a woman at a party who doesn't look like she's comfortable, whether she's with one man or a number of men, walk over and ask if she's okay, and wait until she looks you in the eye and says yes before you leave that situation. Don't be a bystander. I think about what happened in London, Jeff, with 11 men in a room with a woman, and what an absence of leadership. If my son was in that room with those 11 men and that woman, I would be so deeply ashamed of him for not having done what I have taught my kids to do, which is to say something like, enough, this isn't right, it feels wrong, we're gonna shut this down, let's get her home. No one said that. In fact, one of the things that I'll always remember that I didn't put in the book that I should have put in the book. Martina and I were talking about this earlier today. Michael McLeod, one of these 5 co-defendants, and everyone probably knows some of the broad strokes of the story, but he and EM leave the bar and they go and they have consensual sex in his hotel room. And then he gets on his phone and he sends a group text message to 20 teammates. Men that he doesn't actually really know that well, because when you play in the World Juniors, you're with guys from across Canada for a couple of weeks, right? So it's not like these guys have been together for months and months and months bonding. And he sends a group text message saying, hey, who's up for a 3-way? Come back to my room, 209, Mikey. And one of the players on the team responds saying, who's got my charger? Think about that. What a banal event. It was just another Monday night. I think any other man in that situation, it would just be so extraordinary to be one of 20 guys invited back to a group sex event, but not one player said, what are you talking about? Or with who? Or are you sure she's okay with this? Who's got my charger?
Bringing me back to the book, I'll be honest, I was one of those people who had a hard time reading it just because of its such compelling reporting and numerous stories, just like that one. I mean, and I mentioned in my review, for every story you have about EM and the sexual assault trial for Hockey Canada or Ryan James, there are a lot of new revelation stories, right? Stuff that we've never heard about, stories that you would never hear about if you didn't, go across the country essentially and gather this information. The stories you tell are often difficult and highly personal, as you mentioned. What was your process for gaining the trust of the survivors and their families? And how did you navigate telling their painful narratives with journalistic integrity and compassion?
That's a great question. What I've done, because I don't have any formal training in this, I'm just a reporter who fell into reporting on this because after a very high profile story with Cal Beach, people started to find me to tell stories. So my process is when somebody comes and says they have a story that they want to have told publicly, internally at TSN, we have to answer 2 questions. One, is this in the public interest? So by telling this story, is there something that is going to help the community or society by reporting this? If it's sensational, if it's a story about 13-year-old boys doing dumb things, we're not going to report it. And this actually happened a couple of weeks ago with a case in Calgary, a story that had been reported on by the media, and we chose not to report it when we first heard about it because it did not meet our standard. But if we say yes, this is in the public good, then do we have the resources to do it? TSN, for our bread and butter is showing sports events, right? Not doing investigative work. So very small operation. It's me and an editor, my boss and our legal team. And we're at any one time juggling between half a dozen and a dozen stories. I think we've got about 8 that we're working on right now that are in different stages. So that's sort of the first thing. But in terms of like the personal relationships and how you build trust, when somebody comes and says, I want to tell my story. I remember this happened with a young woman named Tori Sullivan who played hockey at Boston College, and she had said she'd been sexually assaulted by a football player, a very prominent player at that school. And when she reported it, she was thrown out of school because the football team reigned supreme in Boston. But I remember saying to her, are you sure? I think you should take some more time and think about this. And we are in a day and age now when the public trust in journalism has never been lower. And we are in an age when people who are purported journalists and work in the media are so consumed with how many followers they have. And it's about them. It's about how many likes and reposts can I get on these stories? And that is what drives a lot of reporting. And I think when somebody who's come and said, I've got a story that I want to share, I think you should take more time and just be 100% positive about this, because once you tell a story and your name is out there, you can't get that back. It's out there forever. And I think that's trust building in itself, because it shows to people that you're there to try to help them. and you're not just trying to get their name in print to help serve your need to have more people following you and paying attention to you.
You know, you call yourself an outsider. I liken myself to that as well. I know the Jets are super cool when I'm in the locker room or walking around really at all. I'm wondering, why do you think it's so challenging? You know, that many of our colleagues, right? You know, who are around the game, who are there every single day. Why is it so difficult? And then that's tough questions when it comes to the culture of hockey.
This is a hard question because it's easy to be judgmental of other media, right? Because this kind of reporting can be lonely. But at the same time, people who, and I've done the job before, I've covered the Toronto Blue Jays and been on the room every day, and covered the Maple Leafs and been in the room every day. And I can't imagine if I was doing this kind of reporting, you know, asking players about painkillers, for instance, when I was covering the team on a daily basis, it would make your job almost impossible. Because the minute you went around to a player's locker, they just would turn off and you'd be excommunicated, right, from that group of reporters. So there is that makes it difficult. It's also this, like I was saying, these stories, I'm working on 6 to 12 right now. How long does it take you, once you first hear about a story, to get it to being published in the Winnipeg Free Press?
I don't even want to say, my editor's in the back row here, and you can already see him laughing at me, staring at me. It takes a while.
The point is,
It takes a while, and it takes a while for a reason, right? It takes a while because you need to digest it.
And you need to do the work.
Totally.
You need to try to corroborate. You need to try to confirm what people are telling you. You need to say, can you go back and look at your text messages on your phone? Can you give any documents that you have? What kind of evidence do you have that can prove the things that you're telling me? That all takes time. And then you do your reporting, and then your editors say, no, this needs, but you need to do more here. So you go back and do it again. And finally, when you get to the point where you and the editor agree on it, then your legal team gets involved and says, no, you need to do more. The resources it takes to do this kind of work are significant. And the fact is, a lot of people who cover hockey don't have the resources to do this. So on one hand, I kind of look and I wish that, man, like, you know, do something. There is reporting to be done that means more than who are the Jets going to trade for at the trade deadline this year. But at the same time, I can be sympathetic to the fact that not everyone has the resources or the capacity to take on this kind of journalism.
You know, let's start with why the power plays and work in baby steps. You mentioned trying to gain the trust of hockey officials and team personnel. What was your biggest obstacle you faced when trying to get candid interviews from within the system? Were there common deflection tactics?
Honestly, it was not hard. I thought that trying, like when I say I interviewed 58 players, there was, you know, one of the players I interviewed was a guy named David Levin, who was the #1 overall pick in the Ontario Hockey League draft. His story is not even in the book because it was too similar to the other stories I've had. And there's besides David Levin, there's like another 20 guys who were willing to be on the record and whose stories didn't, you know, just didn't work. So it actually was it wasn't difficult. And I think the lesson for that for me with this is, you know, you think about times when as a reporter, you know, we're thinking, oh, I should go and ask this organization this question. And the reflex that we might have is, well, no, there's no point in doing that because they're not going to want to talk. Our job is to ask questions. And so even if we're thinking they're not going to want to talk, ask the question because you never know. And in this case, I asked these questions, and time and again, these young men would say, I've wanted to talk about this. I've been thinking about this, but no one has ever asked me about it before.
One of the things I want to pick off that one of the things I find, or you read about, and I've certainly found in my experiences, is you know, especially when you mention kids leave home at 15, 16 years old. When I've talked to these adults, they're still processing. It's like it's almost like they're still that kid from all those years before. And you mentioned they want to share. Do you feel there's an appetite? I don't want to use the word expose in a negative sense, but do you feel like there's a real appetite to talk about this? And it's just what it's just holding us back, is that cone of silence and the other things we're talking about?
I think we're at a time when these stories are, you know, one of the pushbacks I also hear is like, Rick, this isn't hockey. This is a societal problem. Why are you focused on hockey so much? And there's truth in this statement. This is a societal problem, right? When there's stories about imbalance of power and abuse in Hollywood with Harvey Weinstein, there's journalism around that. When there's stories about Larry Nassar, the gymnastics, the doctor at Michigan State, there's journalism around it. Jerry Sandusky at Penn State in football, where there's reporting around that. And so the question to me is not like, why focus on hockey? Why wouldn't we focus on hockey? Hockey has become a religion in our country. And so why would we not hold it to a certain standard and ask these hard questions?
To that point, my answer is always, don't you want to be leaders in this? You have the most influence in the country with sport. And then these organizations you talked about, whether it's domestic violence, whether it's sexual abuse, all these different sectors that need that platform, they need to get their message out. That's why you have these groups going to leagues like the CFL and playing ball with them on their different policies and making sure it works out for them, because they need to get to these people. And hockey has such a platform. But again, why wouldn't you?
My favorite part of writing this book was the last chapter, because the last chapter focuses on the path forward, and there is optimism and there's hope. And one of the organizations that I focused on is the Hamilton Minor Hockey Association. So in Hamilton, Ontario, the minor hockey organization is partnered with a group called Coaching Boys into Men. And Coaching Boys into Men is based in the US, but they've done training with a women's shelter in Hamilton called Integral House. And so Integral House, their workers trained hockey coaches in Hamilton about how to speak to boys about issues of consent. And I went down last season and I watched these sessions where these hockey coaches talk to boys 11 and 12 years old about these sorts of issues. And it was an amazing thing to see, honestly. I talked to actually, Jeff Toole is one of the coaches for the AAA team. I talked to him yesterday about how it's going this year. 16 teams this year are doing this. And so I said, Jeff, tell me about the conversations. What's it like when you are in the locker room speaking to your 12-year-old players? And he said, it's amazing. The players are asking us questions about the Hockey Canada trial in London, 12-year-olds. The players are asking us, one of the players the other day said, there are girls our age who send pictures of themselves that they shouldn't be sending to us. And what an opportunity to talk to these boys about what to do in that situation, right? The players are talking, they have multiple players of color on this team. So the players are talking about racism and how they feel about it and what to do when it happens during a game. In what other setting are they having these conversations? I think, again, we would hope that parents are talking to their kids about consent. It doesn't happen. Not nearly enough. I was at the University of Ottawa last week, and in an audience of about 150, there was about 40 men in their 20s, law students, hockey players, just University of Ottawa students who came to listen. And of those 40 to 50 men, I asked, how many of you have had a conversation about consent with either of your parents? Of those 40 to 50 men, 3. Parents are not having these conversations. They're uncomfortable. What do you say? They don't know how to do it, so it just doesn't happen. It should probably happen in school. It's not happening in school systems. Teachers are overworked. It's just not part of the curriculum, right? So to me, imagine a future where programs like this, Coaching Boys into Men, and it's not the only one, but it's one that seems to be working pretty effectively. Imagine this taking off, and it's spread from Hamilton, like because of the book. An organization called Alliance Hockey in London, Ontario, is right now talking about introducing Coaching Boys into Men in their program. It's happening in Thunder Bay as well. Last week, the Ottawa Minor Hockey Association said they wanted to get involved as well. So maybe with, like you just said, the clout that these young players have who are elite hockey players, how amazing would it be if we could come out of all of these stories of gross scandal and actually help these players who are boys really become the best versions of themselves as they grow into becoming young men, and be true leaders, be the best versions of themselves, and having coaches who care about who they are. And I know every coach will say we care about having well-rounded guys and etc. But like deeds versus words. so that they're having those conversations in those locker rooms. And again, in Hamilton, I asked, how many parents are uncomfortable with this? Is there anybody who's saying, I don't want you talking to my 12-year-old about the London hockey trial? Not one. Every one of the parents on that team, I was told, complete 100% support. And in fact, just one more thought on that. That doesn't mean it's going to be easy. It doesn't mean there's not going to be any problems. In Hamilton, one of those 12-year-olds recently was on the ice and called a kid a pussy during a game. And the referee didn't hear it. And he came back to the bench and his coach said, what happened in the corner? Why was the kid so upset? Do you call him something? And the kid said, yeah. The coach suspended his own player for 2 games. That is deeds versus words. It's holding your players accountable. And you know, if you think about it, what a service that coach gave to that young player, right? By holding him accountable, by showing him this is who we are, these are our values, the kid learned a lesson as opposed to just being told, it's okay, don't worry about it, just don't do it again. Not only did he learn the lesson, every player in that locker room also learned the same lesson. And I really wonder across Canada, how many minor hockey coaches in that same situation would have suspended their own player? Nobody else heard, just the coach and the player. What do you think?
Not a lot. Hopefully more in the future. I think it's interesting too, because part of that, you mentioned that in your book, it's not just the penalty, it's the message behind that, right? You're not going, how dare you, you're out for 2 games, get the hell out of here. It's, you need to learn from what occurred and this is your punishment, right? You're gonna feel that because you love hockey, we're taking that away from you. Yeah. We want to get to audience questions, so I'm gonna ask my last 2 questions in the same one. I'll ask you to be a little more succinct, but they're doing great. They're just for time. So I'm sitting here talking for hours if I could, but got my PBR on. So 2 in 1. Was there a particular interview or personal story during the reporting that fundamentally changed your perspective or became the emotional anchor for your writing? And then my last one for you would be, is there one takeaway or call to action you hope every reader walks away with that definition?
These interviews were all so powerful. Like I haven't actually done a reading anywhere. It's just not my style. But I feel like the other day I picked this up and just started reading it. And I loved reading the quotes from the players, like in their own words. I loved reading, one quote that always that means a lot to me is a friend of mine, Allison Forsyth. She was on the Canadian Olympic ski team, and she was sexually assaulted by her coach while she was an Olympic athlete. And she talked about minor hockey teams. And the quote she gave me, it's in the book, was about how, this is my first reading. I'll read one paragraph, chapter 5. Really nailing that quick answer stuff. I'll just pull the book out, succinct as I can. So she says, there's a reason that hotels don't want to take reservations from minor hockey teams. Kids playing mini sticks in the hallways past midnight and sitting in restaurants and mixing pizza in their pop glasses with ketchup and salt and pepper and crayons and paper placemats. Coaches tell me they want 9-year-olds wearing suits to games to show respect. And I'm like, respect? Turn around and look at how these kids are treating the server, trying to bring them chicken wings. Coaches say it's just kids being kids. They want the poor image to go away, but what are they doing to make it go away? I've seen that scene play out in hotels, and I'm sure you all have as well. Every year, you're on a floor, and there's a hockey team there, and you're like, oh my God, right? They're going to be all night running through the hallways and playing mini sticks. And the minute you say something, a coach or a hockey parent's going to say, hey, chill out. Like, let the kids be kids. Like, didn't you ever play? Didn't you ever have a chance to do a tournament? But the fact is, the lesson we're teaching these kids is about not respecting other people who are trying to get asleep, right? And cloaking this all in this myth that because our kids are wearing suits to a hockey game, that somehow that means that they respect everyone around them and the game. So that stood out. In terms of the message, I think the message is let's first of all encourage and support local journalists like you, people who are reporting on these stories in communities across the country. The reporting needs to be told. So, support journalists like you. Karen Paul's at the back, my friend from CBC who was in London. And ask questions of our governments, right, of the media. Don't be afraid to challenge reporters. On Instagram now, I'm getting messages all the time from people who are asking me, well, why did you report a story this way? Or why did you do that? Or why did you do that? And as long as it's somebody who seems like they're a real person, I'm happy to engage and try to answer questions like that.
I could ask 100 more questions, but I'm sure there's some in the audience that are interested. I will pressure you, but if not, I will go back to my questions.
Thanks for writing a book, by the way. Stuff you do. What do you say to people who want to say something, but they know it will imperil their jobs or their pensions, which then in turn imperils their family?
Well, I mean, I would say that that's a real, in some cases, that's a real concern. Yeah, I've had people say to me, could I be sued? And I have to say yes. You know, I've been sued. It's part of the bargain. I actually have really enjoyed the process of being sued, as odd as that sounds. It's because what it has, honestly, like all that means is that I'm going to learn about the process of going through discovery and filing a defense, and you know, I've never lost a case, right? So when I get sued, TSN, like Bell Media, we have resources to defend, and so that's a legitimate question that some people have, right? But
Especially in Canada, they're lucky to be in Canada, suing and charges like that.
yeah, but you know, I'm trying to think of a time that somebody's asked me that question and then just gone away and not come forward with a story, and I can't think of one where that's actually happened yet.
I was gonna say, if you didn't threaten you with this book.
No one has threatened me with the book. In fact, the only thing that TSN, my bosses, have said to me in terms of this reporting is be right. It doesn't matter if we get beat. If the CBC beats us, if the Globe and Mail beats us, no one in the public cares who's first. People in the public care about us being right and being accurate and being fair. And so what that meant, like back when we broke the story on the London hockey lawsuit, we spent days giving people a fair opportunity to provide a comment. And so every day that passed and Hockey Canada hadn't got back to us, or you know, the Canadian Hockey League, was another day that another reporter could have grabbed that lawsuit and beaten us with the story. But again, the mission statement that we have is, it does not matter who's first, it matters most who's right.
What is kind of the younger age, I guess, onset worries that you see in hockey culture, and what are some ways to counteract it? So you talked a bit about how kind of tackling things head on and talking about consent early on is a big way to stop that perpetual, I guess, toxic environment. Is most of the issues perpetuated from inactivity among adults, or are there actively negative things getting perpetuated that you want to avoid, especially at younger hockey ages?
I'd say that most of the players I followed an agent around who was trying to so an agent, for people that don't know, like these are the guys who negotiate with teams and they help them sign contracts. And so I followed a couple agents around the rinks around Toronto who were recruiting 11-year-olds. And I just thought that was so striking and such a sign of what Canadian minor hockey's become. One of the themes of this book is how minor hockey has become corrupted and become a big business. And then I contrasted that with Sweden. I went to Sweden and looked at how they do hockey. And in Sweden, it's not legal for a hockey agent to contact a family until a player turns 16. Their attitude is more like, let's let the kids be kids and save the business of hockey for later. So, answer your question, like 11, 12 is sort of when I started tracking things.
I have two questions. The first one is, and I think I know the answer because I've listened to you many times in the radio, your title, We Breed Lions. And the second question is, why was the trial in London the outcome that it was? Why were these 5 players not criminally found guilty?
Well, I'm gonna be very careful with what I say about this because
Okay,
it's important to say that, it's important to say that I respect the judgments in our courts. At the same time, I don't understand a lot of what happened. I don't understand the rules of evidence. We heard, multiple text messages that EM had sent to her friends that were admitted as evidence without any issue. And yet there was a text message exchange that I thought was so interesting and revealing, where 2 players who were not charged, not accused of criminal wrongdoing, and one of the players had texted a friend, one of his teammates, saying that he was so glad that he left that hotel room when he did. He had seen Dylan Dubé, another player who was charged, slapping EM so hard it looked like it hurt so bad. And the defense argued that that text message should not be admitted as evidence because it wasn't a formal statement to the police, because there was other messages in this text thread that contained falsehoods. And the judge agreed. So I don't understand how that happened. I think that it was clear that there was inconsistencies in EM's testimony. And if you speak to Crowns or defense lawyers who specialize in this, that's not unusual. When people retell the same story multiple times, there are going to be inconsistencies. At the end of the day, the judge didn't believe her. And I will always wonder how this trial would have wound up if a jury, remember there's 2 juries in this case, and there were 2 mistrials that occurred because of the actions allegedly in one case of the defense team, and then in the second case, the same legal team, there was an interaction with a juror that led to a mistrial. And I'll always wonder what would have happened if a jury was the one that was able to decide the fate of these defendants. And I wonder what it does moving forward. Like, will other people who want to go and report, how will this impact them? Each case is different facts. There's a case, like I just said, there was a case in Quebec that didn't get the national headlines where 2 players pleaded guilty on the eve of their trial because they believed they were going to be convicted. So, I think that I still have hope that people will come forward in some fashion. And one thought on this as well, I've asked Crowns who weren't involved in this case and defense lawyers, like, what do you think about it? And what would your advice be to somebody who'd been sexually assaulted? Would you say you should go to the police? And the consensus I've heard is that it's super important if, in the moments after, as hard as it is to get a sexual assault evidence kit collected. But then the advice I've received is somebody should go and see a lawyer. Before you go to the police, get some independent legal advice. There's no statute of limitations on sexual assault in Canada. You don't have to do it. EM, in the case in London, went in and did a police interview 3 days after this happened. And the experts on this have talked about the amount of shame and self-blame. And so when she's asked by an investigator, whether she might have been enjoying the attention at first, if you read the transcript, and I've read the transcripts of this case many times, is it possible that she was still in that state of shame? I think you can make an argument. Yeah. And you asked about this, the title. Yeah, so each of these junior hockey players I interviewed, I asked them, what does it mean to you to be a junior hockey player? What's that mean? And one guy in Ontario said, I'll paraphrase because I can't find it, but one guy in Ontario said, we move away from our homes, we become the instant alpha males in these small communities. We can get into any bar underage we want, we can talk to any girl, we can skip school whenever we want, we learn the rules of the jungle. We learn that rookies eat last and shower last after games and practices, and you will do anything you have to be a teammate. You'll lie for your teammates if you have to. Civilians wouldn't understand it. I thought that word civilians was just so interesting. He said, we look around the room and we see 20 clones of ourselves and we know we're better than everyone else. This is our culture. We breed lions And how do you tell a lion to stop being a lion? And I wound up reading that quote to other men that I interviewed, and not one of them said, no, this guy doesn't get it. Like every player I talked to was like, wow, that is so on the nose. And so there's my title. Thank you.
Thank you both. We are just at the top of the hour right now, so we can actually we'll go over to Jeff for 1 second, and then we'll just this will be the final question, then we'll go to closing comments tomorrow.
Hi, Rick. My name is Jeff Curvis, and I'm a longtime journalist. And just to your point about the lawsuits, I always think if you haven't been sued, you're not doing the job. And for all the non-journalists out there, the big splash comes from when someone sues journalists, and you don't see it later on, but journalists win 99.9% of those cases. And so the whole lawsuit thing, I think, is garbage because journalists win almost all those cases. But I want to say I've seen a little bit of hope on, you mentioned the kid on the ice.
Before you get to your question, last year I got sued by this gymnastics coach in Calgary, and the Calgary Herald actually did a big story on it, right? Statement of claim, Rick Westhead and TSN allegedly defames gymnastics coach. And the statement of claim is like filled with lies. Rick Westhead did not give me a chance to comment on the story before he published the story. And the Calgary Herald has a big takeout on this. And I was like, what? He didn't call me, didn't give me a chance to comment on it. And then fast forward months later, and we filed our statement of defense. And in the statement of defense, we lay out all of the text messages and emails that we sent asking for a comment, right? And I was begging our lawyers. I'm like, I got to send this to the Calgary Herald. I'm like, no, you can't get involved. The judge might get upset. So the only thing in that case that's in the public record is an allegation against me of defamation, unfortunately. Anyways, so yeah, well, we're gonna win that case.
Well, I was just gonna say, like, you're gonna win and it'll be a 2-inch bridge. But I coached hockey for a long time, and the one that, like, when you talk about the kids yelling at each other on the ice, we once had a kid who blew another guy up after a play, after the whistle went on. And he got, I don't know, got 2 or 4 minutes, but it's a close game. And it's right near the end, and at the end of the game, and he blew the guy up like with a kid and car off the ice. And like, Jesus, it's not even like that. People do that.
For code, that's body check.
Well, right, yeah, sorry. And then we said to him at the bench, like, geez, like you shouldn't do that because late in the game and we're trying to come back. And he told us that the kid had made the guy he had blown up had made an anti-Semitic comment to one of our players. And so we looked at him and we went, all right. So somebody was going after one of his teammates for a non-hockey thing. And so we thought, well, he's come to the defense, and we felt that was a good way of doing it. So we said, like, maybe you don't take the guy's head off, but like, if you do it, try and we're all doing this in people. But my question, I'm going to get to that, is I'm wondering what you think the role of parents is in this, because I was thinking about when I think of abuse in hockey, I think of Patrick O'Sullivan. And there was a book on him that came out a number of years ago called Breaking Away. And for those who don't know, Patrick O'Sullivan's dad was a lunatic. And any hockey parent who thinks they've been singled out as being crazy, read this book and you'll feel better about yourself. Because this guy would, if the kid only scored 2 goals, he thought he should have 4, he would make him, run down the 401 behind the minivan to get back home. He'd wake him up at 3 o'clock in the morning to make him do 200 push-ups. One time, because dad couldn't cook, his wife wasn't there to make some garbage meal, and the kid ate it, and he threw up on his plate, and dad made him eat that. So, and so it's called Breaking Away, and it's a disgusting book. But so I'm wondering what you think the role of parents is here, because we talk about the players and we talk about the coaches, but a lot of this stuff is they're like the kids have already started to form when they get to the coaches. But I think the parents have a significant role to play here too. And I'm wondering what you might have found in the research.
It feels like it's almost self-explanatory to me. Like we know what being a parent, being a good parent means. It means you talk to your kids about the right way to act. Like I don't blowing up a guy on the ice for making an anti-Semitic comment. I can see why in the moment that you would say, yeah, but maybe that's on ice justice. The other part of this is like a lot of these organizations are being run by volunteers, right? Whether it's coaches or presidents of hockey associations or what have you. And truly, people are doing the best they can. And so, you know, we talked earlier about culture and education. I think there's still room for education. I don't think it's online modules. I don't think anybody has any interest in doing more online modules. But I think that there is a place to, you know, even the Hockey Canada Respect in Sport, players all have to do this online module program, coaches all have to, parents don't have to do anything, right? And maybe having them come into the rink and understand and hear from somebody in person about these issues is a way to go.
Parents here do have to respect this part. I don't think it's mandatory here, but the issue is you could turn it on, return in 40 minutes, and you complete it. Like, there is no, I'm not saying that parents should be tested or whatever, but to your point, I think education is the major missing piece. And it's figuring out how to create that education so that it's
But it has to be the right education. Like the consent training that junior hockey players get. Many teams in Canada, if they do consent training at all, what that looks like is, and I talked to a player, to a coach in Quebec, in the Quebec Maritime Junior Hockey League, and he said that on his team, once a year, somebody from an organization that fights gender-based violence comes in and talks to the guys for an hour every September during training camp. So imagine a horseshoe of chairs and 17 to 20-year-olds leaning back with their hoodies on, their earbuds in. And then they roll in a TV and they show the consent video, the cartoon. It's, you know, hey, you can have a cup of tea if you want. If you want to have a cup of tea, you can have it. But if you change your mind and you don't want to have the tea anymore, you don't have to have the tea. And that's what these players are being shown every year. That is not effective education, but it is box checking. So the organizations can say, no, we've done our education with these guys.
you even look at the Hockey Canada trial, like with EM, forcing her to do a consent video in that thing. I mean, that's the education some of these high-level hockey players are getting, is how to protect themselves,
Well,
not protect the people around them.
and the 5 defendants in the Hockey Canada trial all would have had the consent training that the OHL.
Well, they were on the chat list going, hey, I forget the man's name, but it was like, you know, he's told us to do this, and you know, this is the next step when we've done this. And it's all about protectionism. It's not about being a better human. And the reality is hockey culture is a major problem. There's a lot to love about hockey. There's a lot that I know you've learned playing the game. I've certainly learned playing the game. I owe a lot to the game. But there is a culture that is like a lot of systemic issues with different industries, different places, different things. It will be difficult. Do you see, I'll leave this on this one, do you see a better future?
For sure. I just talked about what's happening in Hamilton. There are some junior teams that are doing things differently, junior C teams, junior A teams, major junior teams. There's hope. I hope that reporting like this gets picked up by other media. You know, like maybe you will, and maybe you already have done this, but maybe other reporters in Winnipeg will start asking junior teams here, what are you guys doing? And holding them accountable. And so maybe the book can serve a purpose, which is holding all of these different coaches across Canada to account for why, you know, if they're not doing this, why aren't they doing that? How could in 2025, after seeing all these stories, you not recognize there's a problem and try to fix it? I will say, just to finish, I will shamelessly push this. My proceeds from this book are going to women's shelters like the London Abuse Women's Center and the Toronto Rape Crisis Center. So this has never been a book that for me is about money. I'm not making money off of this. I want to make a difference, and I want hockey to be as good a game as it should be. Awesome.
Thank you both so much. Thank you everyone here for your attention, for your comments, and for your questions. We'll be moving along to the signing portion of the evening in just a minute too, so there'll be a moment of chaos while everybody gets in line right here. I'll wander down the line and write your name on Post-it notes, not because we don't trust you to spell, but that means you can spend more time actually talking when you get to the table. Please do feel free to get a copy of the book signed before you pay for it. Just please do remember to visit my colleagues at the cash desk before you leave. We're so very grateful to Random House of Canada for making this book a possibility and for making this evening a possibility. To all of you once again, we couldn't have asked for a better host than Jeff Hamilton of the Winnipeg Free Press. Please give more round of applause. book is We Breed Lions. The author is Rick Westhead. We're so happy he was here tonight. Thank you so much. Thank you all for being here.